Well, good morning and welcome to the Richland County Park District's Family-Friendly Bird Day. Because of COVID this year, we're doing things a little bit differently. So all of our activities this year will be online, live streamed, YouTube videos, and things of that nature. But what we wanted to do is try to walk you through a little bit of what our Family-Friendly Bird Day would normally be, the different types of activities that we would do. And over the course of the day today, we'll be showing you Facebook feeds, we'll be doing YouTube videos and such, and we'll be doing some interactive question and answers and things throughout the day as well. So typically when we start Family Friendly Bird Day, we start with breakfast with the birds. Again, because we're doing COVID, not doing a lot of inside activities right now, we're not typically doing what we would do for a normal family-friendly bird day or breakfast with the birds. Typically for breakfast with the birds, it's more of a laid-back experience where we try to have folks come in and learn about the common birds in their area, the birds that might be coming to their feeders. So typically that's an activity that we do in January, February, and March. We would have a continental breakfast where folks could come in and eat donuts from Apple Hill Orchard, fruit, hot beverages, things of that nature. And then basically folks walk around the room and they look at the different literature and handouts that we have, bird specimens that we have available, and things of that nature. So we'll look at that a little bit, talk a little bit about basic bird watching and things you can do for seeing and identifying birds at your feeders at your house. Later on today, we're going to be joining Steve McKee, who's going to be doing a bird in a hand program. So he's going to be doing bird banding, and you'll get to see some birds up close. We'll do some question and answer sessions, and then we'll round out the day with talking about different types of ways that you can feed birds, different types of food that you can give to the birds that come to your feeder, and we'll make some crafts for the kids to be able to take home, different types of bird feeders, a pine cone bird feeder, and some other activities that the kids can work on with the adults at home. So again, typically if you were to come in for Family Friendly Bird Day, you'd start out with, again, breakfast with the birds. You'd come in, eat some breakfast, walk around, ask questions. Instead of doing a hike outside, we basically go back and forth to the feeders in the buildings. We look at the different basic birds that would come in, the common feeder birds that you would find in your area. And if you want to find out more about those birds and things you can do, we do different programs throughout the year, including a basic bird feeding workshop. And we also do a beginning bird watching course as well. And we usually start those out in January, and those have already taken place, and we've got things going on with those as we speak here coming into 2021. So typically once you would grab your breakfast out of the kitchen, you would mingle around with the group, and one of the first areas that you would hit is this table full of goodies. We believe in people going home with something in their hands, whether that's a field guide, whether that's a checklist, some information on bird watching in the area. So we have this table full of handouts here. I'll let Amanda pan through some of that. You start out with some ODNR books here. These are free ODNR books that you can get from the Division of Wildlife. Guides on raptors, owls, warblers, water birds, and common birds. A lot of those that you might see at your feeder. Many of them also have CDs that you can pick up to take home. In addition to that, we have checklists for the birds in our area or birds of Ohio. A lot of literature on Gorman Nature Center and the Park District, ways you can volunteer, join our friends group, and then organizations in Ohio, some that are close to us, like the Bird Sanctuary, Ohio Ornithological Society, Black Swamp Bird Observatory, the Young Birders Club with Black Swamp, so kids can get involved in a group with their peers, Lake Erie Birding Trail, and so on and so forth, as well as other literature pertaining to the Division of Wildlife and how you can support them, guides on warblers, guides on how to attract birds to your backyard, wildlife journals, and also time and optics guides, so you can learn about the different types of optics that you can get if you want to learn how to go bird watching and go to different areas. So also, I forgot to mention, the sign that I'm holding up here is that our Family Friendly Bird Day we always do in conjunction with the Great Backyard Bird Count, which is put on by Audubon and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And this goes on over a 3 or 4 day period. Typically we confine our activities to the weekend, and the Great Backyard Bird Count is an interactive activity as well, so that the birds that we're seeing throughout the day here at Gorman Nature Center, whether they're at the feeders or out on our trails, we can add those birds into eBird and onto Cornell's site, and basically you can see a live feed over the entire 3 or 4 days of where people are seeing birds, what kind of birds they're seeing, the number of birds that they're seeing. So we work our activities together with the Great Backyard Bird Count to do our family-friendly bird day. So once we've taken a look, you've got your food, you've walked over here and taken out some of the literature and some freebies to go home, then we can go and talk a little bit about some of the birds you might see at the feeders as we walk around the building. So one of the nice things about being here at the Park District with Gorman Nature Center is over a long period of time, folks that worked here, people like Steve McKee and Merrill Tawes, collected a lot of different bird specimens. And while you can also have scientific study skins that you can use that provide a lot of good information for science and research, you can also just have skins or preserved specimens that can be used for programs. So in terms of scientific study, these specimens don't provide a lot of value, but the birds themselves, the skins, the dried specimens, enable us to do programs like this. And basically what we have here is a collection of birds from our area that probably these are all the birds that you would most likely commonly see associated with your bird feeders around Mansfield or in most of Ohio in the wintertime. So here's an opportunity where you can come up close and personal and look at these birds and check them out, ask questions about them, what kind of woodpeckers you have, and so on and so forth. So we're going to come back to this, and we're going to talk a little bit about bird watching first and what you would need to go look at the birds at your feeder. And then we'll come back over here to the birds, and we'll identify some of the common birds that we have. We'll look at birds that might look similar, that you might want to be able to come into a program like this and be able to tell different things apart. And know that these are available when we do these, so you can come in and ask those types of questions. So if you're going to do bird watching, obviously if you have a feeder, you can look outside the window at your feeder and just get a general idea of what's there. But to bring things in a little bit closer, you might want to have something that helps you aid in identification. So two of the things that you would need, especially if you were inside, would be a good pair of binoculars. And again, if you're just watching birds from inside your home, you might not necessarily need a very expensive pair or a very good pair of binoculars. Something that just brings the birds in a little bit closer, helps you see details and things like that. Or you can spend hundreds or thousands of dollars on binoculars and spotting scopes and things like that, depending on what you want. But any kind of binocular will help you bring the birds in a little closer to see the details that you're looking for to help in identification. The other nice thing about looking at birds at your feeder, especially in the wintertime, is that you only have a limited number of birds. There have been over 400 species of birds seen or identified in the state of Ohio. But at any given time at your bird feeder in the winter, you might only see 8 to 10, maybe 15 species of birds, and you can become very familiar with them. So you're going to see blue jays, cardinals, goldfinches, things over and over again. So when something unusual does show up to your feeder, you're going to know that's different. And when you look at birds at different times of the year, you're going to know, well, those are the common birds I know, but there's a new bird that I'm not familiar with. And so that will help you get a handle on some of the more common species and then be able to look for things beyond that. But once you have a pair of binoculars so you can see what's going on, whether it's at your feeder or outside walking around, you'll also want some kind of a field guide. Something that will help you have a reference for the birds that you're looking at. Now, again, we talked about the ODNR guides before. They don't have all the birds in Ohio, but they have some of the more common ones, especially common birds you might see in your feeder or your backyard, water birds that you might see out at a pond or a lake, some of the common hawks and things of that nature. But you might want to have a larger field guide, something that has a little more depth to it. The Peterson Eastern Guide, the large format edition, just larger pictures, larger text that shows all the eastern birds. But for feeder birds, one of the books that I like is just Peterson's Guide to the Feeder Birds of Eastern North America. So you'll notice this book's a lot thinner than this book or some of the other field guides you might see. And basically this book is going to focus on most of the birds that you would just see at your feeders. Again, a lot of the things that you might see over there that we have on the table. So things like some of the blackbirds, wrens, the finches that you might see in the wintertime, cardinals, woodpeckers. So it's going to cut down a little bit on the things that you're going to see. You don't necessarily need to see all the warblers and the vireos and the tanagers, but to focus more on the birds that are going to come into your feeder. So it makes it easier for you to understand the common birds that are going to be there. Again, something rare shows up, you're going to know it because you've become familiar with the birds that come into your feeder all the time. You can also find out more about bird watching by joining a club or an organization, possibly by subscribing to a magazine like Birdwatchers Digest, which is produced right here in Marietta, Ohio. By joining an organization like the Richland County Park District and our Friends group and finding out about the different activities that we have going on. For example, I talked earlier about our beginning bird watching course, our beginning bird feeding course, the bird walks that we do here, our owl prowls, our woodcock walks, different field trips that we take. You can find out all that on our calendar here. So it's basically getting together with a group of people, finding out places you can go, things you can look at. But again, we don't want to overwhelm folks, so being able to come in and just look at common birds here at the Nature Center is one way you can do that. And at the Family Friendly Bird Day and at the Breakfast with the Birds, that's an easy way to do that. Sort of laid back, not a lot of pressure. We're not going to go out and look at lots and lots of birds. We're just going to look at some of the common things. So again, we've got our binoculars and our bird guide in hand, so now we can go back over and identify and look at some of the birds that we might see at the feeders. Again, we're going to take a look at some of the common birds you can see at your feeders here around this area in Ohio. And again, this is pretty much just about every common bird or even unusual bird that you might see come to your feeder in the wintertime. And again, it's nice to be able to have these in hand so you can see them up close, see the differences, learn males from females and things like that. For instance, right here in the front, you've got all the woodpeckers that we might see in our area, from the giant pileated woodpecker to the flicker, the northern flicker or yellow-shafted flicker, red-headed woodpecker, red-bellied woodpecker. You see here we have the female and the males with their red bellies. A lot of people call those red-headed woodpeckers without ever seeing a red-headed woodpecker. And then when you get them in hand like this, you can tell why they're called red-bellied woodpeckers. Yellow-bellied sapsucker. And two of them that might look very, very similar, but this is a good example of why having the birds in hand is beneficial, to be able to see these things up close. So here we have a hairy woodpecker, and here we have a downy woodpecker. These guys morphologically or based on their physical characteristics look exactly the same except for their size. The coloration, the way their patterning is, they look almost identical. They're very hard to tell apart until you see them side by side and you can actually see the difference in the shape, the size of the bird, the size of the beak. You can see the hairy woodpecker has a much, much larger bill as opposed to the downy, which is very, very small. The only difference between male and female in these species is that the males have a red dot on the back of their head and the females do not. Most woodpecker species have a little bit of differentiation between the male and the female. Like, for instance, on the red-bellied woodpecker, you can notice the male's red goes all the way from the base of his neck to the tip of his bill here, the base of his bill, where the females will stop at the back of her head. And so you'll be able to tell the male from female. Red-headed woodpeckers, male and female, are the same. The yellow-shafted or northern flicker, this is a female. The male will have a black malar stripe or like a mustache stripe on it. And then we have the pileated woodpecker here, with, again, this being a female because the male will have a little bit of red on the side of the head, and it'll also have red that'll go all the way from the base of the bill to the back. So this was a female. So there are ways you can tell those apart. But again, a lot of people get woodpeckers at their feeder, and this is a good example to be able to come in and see all the different woodpeckers and to be able to tell them apart up close. Some other birds you might see are things like mourning doves, cedar waxwings, some of the corvids, things like American crows and blue jays. You might also get some thrushes at your feeders around the wintertime if you put out some kind of fruit or mealworms or things like the eastern bluebird. And here we have the males, the female, and a young bluebird. American robins. Robins don't leave in the winter. Sometimes some of them go a little further south, but if they have food sources, they'll stick around. If you put in out any kind of fruit or any kind of mealworms or something, you might attract a flock of robins to your feeder. Of course, our state bird, the northern cardinal. Cardinals are interesting. Back in the time of John James Audubon, back in the 1700s, cardinals, or cardinal grosbeaks as they were called, because of that large beak that cracked seeds, were mostly known from the southern states, down in places, maybe they would get as far north as Virginia or up into Pennsylvania. Now cardinals can be found all the way up into New England, and they think in part that's because of people feeding birds and birds being able to move around and expand their territories. You might also get some blackbirds. We use blackbirds as a loose term because of all these birds that look black, but many different species. Things like the common grackle, the red-winged blackbird. Here we have a male, and then we also have a female here, or a juvenile bird. The brown-headed cowbird male. You might also get starlings that come into your feeders a lot and see some of the different, go after the foods that you have. So in the wintertime, we also get a lot of winter finches. We're very fortunate this year to have evening grosbeaks around, but you'll get things like pine siskins here on the end. You'll get some of the purple finches. Now we have both purple finches and house finches in our area. Prior to 1945, if you saw a purple finch at your feeder, it would have been a purple finch. After that, there's a possibility you could have house finches. House finches are a bird that's from the American Southwest. Here we have a male and a female. They were brought over into New England for the pet trade, and then they were released. So now they've almost gone all the way back across America over to where they were originally from. But purple finches, the one that's on the far left there, the male bird you would much more see in the wintertime or on migration. They're much more of a northern breeder, but we do get them down here in the winter. We also have the common goldfinch. Now, of course, here we see the male in the middle as he would appear in the summertime. And then also on the other side, we have two of them that are in their winter plumage. People would also call American goldfinches wild canaries because they were bright yellow. And a lot of people would always call and ask over the years, where did my wild canaries go in the wintertime, or where are my goldfinches? And it's not that they've left, they've just changed their plumage color. A lot of birds will change plumage color in the wintertime, and primarily that's to blend in. They don't need those pretty colors during the breeding season. Obviously it's not the breeding season, so they don't have to expend a lot of energy for that. So a lot of birds will change their plumage, and come springtime the American goldfinches will start to get their yellow coloration back again, both the males and the females. We might also see things like evening grosbeaks. Typically this is a fairly rare bird that nests up in the north. Fortunately, we have an eruption year this year where there are just thousands and thousands of evening grosbeaks that have come down, and this is the first time in almost 30 or 40 years that we've seen this many evening grosbeaks come down into our area of Ohio. And that has to do a lot of times with the different types of seed crops that are up north. Did they have a good summer for producing those crops? So in the winter there's a food shortage, and now the birds are coming south to look for things. You might also see other things at your feeders like white-winged or red crossbills, common redpolls. So there are some other finch species as well as you can see. So now you'll notice in the middle of the table we have two birds you might not see feeding at your feeder traditionally with bird seed or bird food, but you are going to occasionally get some hawks that are going to come into your feeder. A lot of people don't like that, but many species of hawks eat birds. These two species in particular, the Cooper's hawk and the sharp-shinned hawk. Again, these are two birds that look very, very similar. The juvenile birds of both species look similar, as well as the adults of both species look very similar. Primarily it's size that tells the difference. Sharp-shinned hawks are much smaller. A male sharp-shinned hawk isn't much bigger than a blue jay. This, I believe, is a female. And this is an adult bird with the gray plumage and the reddish or brownish barred breast, where the juvenile birds of both Cooper's and sharp-shinned hawks, and this is a juvenile Cooper's hawk, are mostly brown with a vertical striped breast. You'll tend to see more juvenile birds at your feeders because they're not as good a hunter, they're not as experienced as the adults are, And so they'll come to bird feeders because they see a lot of birds there, and they'll want to try to get a free meal. Sometimes they're not very good at it. They'll run into your windows. But these two species of birds are in a group of hawks called the accipiters. And accipiters are short-winged, long-tailed hawks that are designed to maneuver through the forests. And the birds that you see on this table are their primary food source. So if you put out a bird feeder, there's a possibility you might actually attract hawks as well, because that's the kind of food that they eat. If we go around the inner circle quickly here, starting over here with the hummingbird, we can see some of the other smaller species that we might have come into the bird feeders. Now, hummingbird, obviously a ruby-throated hummingbird is a tropical species. It's going to go down south in the winter. It's going to go to Mexico, Central and South America. It can't survive here in the wintertime. It likes warm temperatures. But if you leave your hummingbird feeders up in the fall, October, November, you might get a hummingbird that's a little brown. And that might be a rufous hummingbird. And that's a western species that will show up at our feeders here in the fall. So it's always a good idea to leave your feeder up until it freezes, because you might actually get one of these rare hummingbird species show up at your feeder, and they'll actually use your bird feeder, your hummingbird feeder, as a fuel source to get to their next stop, because they may be trying to get south. They might have gotten blown off course by a storm. And so having that food source there for them is helpful. And you can leave your hummingbird feeder up as long as you want. The ruby-throated hummingbirds will leave when it's time for them to leave. That's what they do. They know that. Having that feeder up isn't going to prevent them from doing that. But having your feeder up might provide some of these vagrant hummingbirds with a food source if they get blown off course and they need something to get them on to the next leg of their journey. We've got wrens that stick around all winter. There are several species of wrens in Ohio. The largest wren that we have is the Carolina wren. Very loud, very vocal bird. It will stay around all winter long. It's got a big eye stripe, likes to get inside buildings and build its nests and things like that. We've also got the house wren here on the left. Very, very rare to ever see a house wren in Ohio in the wintertime. There may be one bird every year is seen in Ohio somewhere, and that's because wrens are primarily insectivores, which means they eat bugs and insects. And there aren't very many bugs and insects out here running around in Ohio in the wintertime. So that's another bird that's going to be a neotropical migrant. It's going to go all the way down to Central and South America for the wintertime. It's probably the most common wren that you would see in your yard, especially if you put out a wren box or a wren house. But the Carolina wren is primarily the one you're going to see here in the wintertime. You might also see a winter wren, which is the smallest species. It's even smaller than the house wren, but that's a bird that you typically see out around streams and things of that nature, not necessarily at your bird feeder. The brown creeper is another species that might come into your feeder. Again, it's primarily looking for insects, so it might be around your feeder looking for bugs that might be coming in to eat the bird seed or some suet that you might have. It's a bird that crawls up along the tree trunks. It'll start at the bottom and usually work its way up. Very, very well to see. If you don't see it moving, you probably won't see it, and that's called the brown creeper. We've got our chickadees. Now, most people see a chickadee and they think black-capped chickadee. Now, fortunately in Ohio, we have black-capped chickadees, but we also have another species, the Carolina chickadee. And it just so happens that in Ohio, there's a dividing line for these two species. And typically, historically, we look at that dividing line as right around Route 30. So it goes right through our area. So if you're a little north of Route 30, you're probably going to see a black-capped chickadee. If you're a little south of Route 30, probably a Carolina. If you go up to Shelby, to the Black Fork wetlands, you'll almost certainly see a black-capped chickadee. If you go down to Butler, you'll almost certainly see Carolina chickadees. Same thing, go to Cleveland, definitely black-capped. Columbus, Cincinnati, Carolina. You know, all the way to Canada, black-capped, Florida, Carolina chickadees. They also overlap where that zone is, where you have both species, and we also get hybrids. Now, we do have examples here of both of them. If you'll notice, the black-capped chickadee tends to be a little larger. It's the bird that's here on the left. And you'll notice the Carolina chickadees are here on the right. A little bit smaller. You'll notice the size of the bird, the length of the tail. So, and we do get hybrids here as well, as I said. So it depends on where you live in the area. If you live right around Mansfield, you might get both, depending on the time of the year. This time of year, we might get black-capped chickadees here at the Nature Center because it's a winter time and they might push a little farther north. The Carolina chickadees are what we typically have here at the Nature Center, though, all year long. Running around or flying around with flocks of chickadees, you might find things like the tufted titmouse, which looks like a little gray version of a cardinal. It's got a little tufted crest on it. Very vocal bird, very loud and noisy like the chickadees. Along with the chickadees and the titmice, you'll also get nuthatches. We have 2 species of nuthatches in Ohio that we'll see at our feeders. In fact, we're seeing both of them right now. We have the larger white-breasted nuthatch, which you'll see all year long. It's a larger bird with this sort of a gunmetal gray back with the dark cap and a longer bill and a nice, white breast here. Then we also, if you're lucky in the wintertime, we'll get our northern visitor. This guy breeds up north, and this is the red-breasted nuthatch. Red-breasted, nice rusty red breast on it. This is a male with a nice dark cap, and again, that nice blue-gray back. And then they have a little dark line through their eye. And this is, again, a bird that you'll typically see in the wintertime only in Ohio, maybe early spring, late fall, as they're migrating through. But this is a bird that will definitely be up more in the northern reaches of the state. Occasionally they will stick around our area because they like places like Mohican, because a lot of the pine trees and the cool ravines over there, you'll occasionally get some of these that will stick around and try to breed in our area. So those would be the 2 nuthatch species that you would watch for. And then finally the sparrows. And sparrows can be very confusing, but the good thing is that during different times of the year you'll see different sparrows. So if you become familiar with the common sparrows, you'll know that throughout the year you'll typically know to see different things at different times. Now we'll start out here with the English sparrow or the house sparrow, which isn't actually a sparrow at all in the correct sense. The house sparrow or English sparrow is a non-native invasive species that was brought over from Europe and Asia. It's actually a social weaver finch. So I'll often tell people, if you see a big flock of sparrows on the ground and something hits the window or you scare the birds, you'll see all the house sparrows fly off at the same time together in a big group, where our native sparrows, like the song sparrows or white-throated sparrows, will usually sit tight. And they're usually at the feeders, usually only 2 or 3 birds, where you'll see a much larger group with the house sparrows. If you don't like house sparrows at your feeder, a lot of times the bird feed that you feed them will help determine exactly what types of sparrows you get. So if you feed really good quality seed, not a lot of fillers like wheat and milo and millet and things like that, you probably won't get a lot of house sparrows coming in. You'll get more of the native species. So in the winter time, there are several species that we will get, more so than we would during the summer or the breeding season. The bird that you'll tend to most often see in your yard during the summer would be the chipping sparrow. It's one of our smallest species. In the winter time, and the chipping sparrow has this nice little rusty red cap, a nice pale breast on it, tiny little beak, and no dots or streaks on the chest. Now in the wintertime, you might get a rare chipping sparrow that will stick around your feeder, but they change their coloration, sort of like the goldfinch does. The rusty cap goes away and it gets all streaky, and they get more of just a overall general dirty look to them. They're not quite as crisp and clean as they are. Now, that sparrow with the rusty cap will go away in the wintertime. It'll go a little further south, and you'll get a new sparrow with a rusty cap that'll come in the winter. And that's the American tree sparrow. You'll notice, too, it has a bicolored bill. It's yellow and black, as opposed to the chipping sparrow just being a dark black bill. It also has a dot on its chest. This is a bird that breeds in the north, and it comes down in the wintertime. We tend to start to see these around October or early November here, and they'll usually stay till March or April. The other sparrow that they come down with is the snowbird, as my grandma used to call them, or the dark-eyed or slate-colored junco. And that would be this bird right here. You have the male that's more of a dark charcoal black color, and the females that tend to be more of a brownish or gray. Again, this is a bird species. It's a sparrow that has a pink bill, so that's one way you can tell it from some of the other species, a light-colored bill. This is a bird that, again, will be up in the north, nesting up in the pine forest, the boreal forest, and when the other sparrows go away, like the chipping sparrow goes south, the tree sparrows and the juncos will come down from the north to feed at your feeders. In the springtime, then they'll leave and they'll go up north again. Also in the wintertime, you might get things like the white-throated sparrow. He's got a nice white throat with these nice yellow lores or spots before his eyes, nice streaky head here. And you'll also get another one with a white streaky head, which is the white-crowned sparrow. And you'll notice the white-crowned sparrow has a pink bill, where the white-throated sparrow has a dark-colored bill. You'll also get white-crowned sparrows that are tan. There's a tan color for them, but there's also the juveniles tend to be this tan color as opposed to the nice white and black stripes that sort of look like a skunk. These are, again, birds that don't typically breed around here in this part of Ohio. These, again, are birds that usually show up in the wintertime at your feeders. Then we have a common one and a rare bird that look very similar. And the one on the right is the song sparrow. Song sparrow you'll find all year long around your yard. They have a dot with a lot of streaks on their breast. But there's also another species that nests further up north that will come down in the fall, winter, and early spring, and that's the fox sparrow. And if you look at them, you might say they look very similar. They've got this streaky breast, sort of spotted at the top, sort of the same color, but fox sparrows are a little bit bigger. And if you turn them over, you'll notice the fox sparrow is this nice rusty red color, rusty red rump on the tail here, and where the song sparrow is just more of a general brown color. And again, you'll see, notice it's a much larger bird. But again, noting the birds that come into your feeder. A fox sparrow is usually only going to be at your feeder in the wintertime, like the junco, like the tree sparrow. So they're only usually during the breeding season, during the summer, would be a couple sparrows around your feeder, maybe the song sparrow and the chipping sparrow. So knowing the different types of birds and knowing the seasons that they're in will help you as well. So again, you can see here as Amanda pulls back, lots of different species of birds that may come into your feeder. And again, this might seem a little overwhelming, but this is typically 95 to 99% of the birds that you would see typically come to your bird feeder. So if you learn these birds, you learn to tell those common birds, then you'll have a better understanding of the other birds that might come into your yard, the warblers, the tanagers, the orioles, the vireos, and things of that nature. So learning the common birds that come into your feeder can be very helpful when trying to learn to identify all the different birds you might see in your yard or in Ohio. And coming to our activities here in the winter, where again you can see these birds up close, maybe take pictures with your camera, bring the pictures in here and compare them with the bird specimens that we have. It's a very, very useful tool that we have for being able to educate folks about the different types of wildlife that they have here in their backyard in Ohio. And that's beginning bird watching here, and what we would typically do during our breakfast with the birds. We'll mill around the building after that, eating our donuts, and basically just having a good time talking with folks about different aspects of bird watching and attracting birds. And then after that, we would get ready for Steve McKee to do his Bird in the Hand program. So that'll be coming up a little later today. After Steve's Bird in the Hand bird banding program, we'll be doing some Q&A, questions and answers later on. And then again, later on, around about 3 o'clock today, we'll be doing our talking about bird feeding, some of the bird seed you might have at your feeder, and then ways you can attract birds, and then also doing those crafts with the kids about, how do you make a bird feeder, quick, easy bird feeder that you can have for the kids to take and hang outside at your house. So we'll see you back in a little while.